We'll begin from here. We were looking at the Aruch HaShulchan, Tafresh Yud Bet, and he mentioned something which I started to try to explain, and we looked at the Rambam in Hilchot Shkagot. I want to try to explain some of the concepts here in a little more depth, and bear with me. I'll do the best I can. This was the question that came up that Miner actually asked a question about that provoked this discussion, but it was a good question. So here the Aruch HaShulchan says, second. Okay. Aruch HaShulchan says here, "Ve'ein chiluk b'yom kippurim bein shel davar isur uvein shel davar heter. Im ha'ma'achal ra'ui la'achila chayav karei. V'im laf patur." So, this is something that we saw already back in the Mishnah. There's this idea that even if you eat something that the Torah already forbids you from eating, and we saw some of this in the Sugya in the Gemara, things that the Torah says you're not allowed to eat any day of the year, like pigul v'notar, or nevela, or trefa, or any of these things. Even if you eat them Yom Kippurim, it's also asur. You're not right. You're still chayav karet. V'imlav patur. Ve'en lomar. You can't say Deba'ochel isur b'yom kippurim ein isur yom kippurim chal ha'isur ha'acher. You can't say that when you eat something that's forbidden on Yom Kippur, that the isur of Yom Kippur doesn't fall on. In other words, it doesn't come on top of the other isur. In other words, here's the question. Just a second. I just want to turn the phone off. Here's the question. If you have if you violate two isurim at the same time or within the same act, is that significant somehow? Is it, or do we say that, once you violated an isur, you can't put another isur on top of it? So there's a general rule, and we're going to look into this a little bit today. There's a general rule that ein isur chal al isur. The general rule is that one isur does not come on top of another isur, and we'll give examples of that. And so, what the Aruch HaShulchan here is discussing, he's referencing this concept. When he says, "Ein lomar deba'ochel isur b'yom kippurim, ein isur yom kippurim chal ha'isur acher." In other words, he's saying, even though in the rest of the Torah the general rule is ein isur chal al isur, but you can't say that by Yom Kippurim. De'eino kain. It's not true. De'eino kain. V'lo mebaye imoto ha'isur hu isur lav. Dechal lav isur chamur. Say, we don't need to say that if the isur we're talking about is an isur lav, meaning in general we're going to divide isurim up into different categories. So we have an isur would be an isur karet, an isur which if you did b'mezid, you're chayav karet, and just as a general rule, any isur for which you're chayav karet b'mezid, you're chayav a korban chatad b'shogeg. That's a general rule. And an Isur Lav would be something for which you're not Chayav Karet, but still forbidden from the Torah. So you will get Malkut for it, or you'll get some punishment like that. So he's saying, we don't need to say Isur is an Isur Lav, Techal Lav Isur Chamur, Yoma Kippurim. So if it was an Isur Lav, and then on top of it, so let's say you ate something that was forbidden for which you're not Chayav Karet, and then the Isur Chamur of Yom Kippurim comes on top of it because you ate on Yom Kippur, Ela afilu hu Isur Chamur, kamo chele v'dam, right? He's saying it. He's saying I'm telling you that Isur, even though Isur generally is not Chal al Isur, on Yom Kippur, it will be effectively that the Isur of Yom Kippurim will come on top of even in another Isur Chamur, like eating Chelev and Dam. Mikom Makom, Yom Kippurim have Isur Kolel. Now he's using this is a technical term. He's saying Yom Kippurim is an Isur Kolel. It's an Isur that includes other, that can include or can encompass other Isurim. Shekolel gam kol ha'ma'achalim, it includes all manner of foodstuffs. And we saw this in a couple of Braitot in the Gemara, right, where it went through all these things that you might think that Yom Kippurim is only for this, but not for this, maybe not for this, and it went through a whole list of things that included things that are asur. The Isur Kolel Chal, and Isur Kolel does is Chal. It does literally falls out. It means that it asserts itself, like it asserts its authority or its power. We don't say about Yom Kippurim that an Isur does not fall out on another Isur. The Davar Zeh Mevuar b'Rambam Perek Shishi Meshkagot Din Dalid Ayin Sham. So that's took a quick look at last time. The Od Mevuar Sham. It's also explained there. The Ochev HaShoteh b'Yom Kippurim b'Shogeg b'Helem Echad Eno Chayav Ela Chatat Echad. He also explains there that if you eat and drink on Yom Kippur b'Shogeg, in one unconscious act, in other words, that you didn't know that today was Yom Kippur and you ate and drank, or you knew today was Yom Kippurim, but you but you didn't remember that you're not allowed to eat and drink on Yom Kippur, whatever the headline was. If you eat and drink in the same helem on Yom Kippur, you only bring one korban chatat, because as we discussed, they're in the same category. Or the term that's used is they have the zemeotos shem. They're under the same name. They're under the same category. Eating and drinking is really one pula, even though the halachot of achilah and shtiyah break down because the shiurim are different. Right? The other thing you're not allowed to do on Yom Kippur is melacha. So eating is one shame, and doing melacha is a different shame. And so if you did them behelem echad, it doesn't matter. They're two different categories, and you would be a chayav chatat for each of them. So it's not that you can be to get to a point that Michael Warner brought up last time. It's not that you can be chayav karet more than once, because karet is a singular punishment, but you're in the category of somebody who's a chayav chatat. V'od mevuar sham b'pishi the chayavei chataot v'hashamot she'avar lehen Yom Kippurim chayavin lahvi achar Yom Kippurim. If you are a person who was obliged to bring already a korban chatat or a korban asham, and you went through Yom Kippurim, you observed Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is not mechaper for those sins unless you bring your korban. If you're chayav in Asham Talui, then Yom Kippur, in fact, is poter from an Asham Talui. So an Asham Talui is something you would bring when you don't know, when there's some doubt as to whether or not you were over on a Yisur. So this last part is a separate issue. And I think we're actually going to deal with the very last part here. I think we're going to deal with that at the end of the chapter in Yoma, where it's more, where that's where the Gemara discusses it more. Okay, so this is the Aruch HaShulchan. So I was thinking how best to try to explain this. So this is what I thought. I'm going to show you. Let's look at the Mishnah in Kritot. So now some of you may have learned Kritot before. We're not going to go through the whole first few chapters. I want to really show you your Mishnah in Perek Shlishi. Just to give you a quick introduction, Kritot opens up by laying out what are the Isurim and the Asin, right? There's also two Asin, or two positive commandments for which you're Chayav Karet if you don't do them. But you have altogether 36 instances of Karet in the Torah. Most of them, about half of them, are related to Arayot of one sort or another. Then we have a whole bunch of various ones along the way. Is V'ochel ha'ochel v'ha'osem malacha b'yom kippurim. Right, so that's two instances of karet: eating on Yom Kippur and doing malacha on Yom Kippur. Al elu chayavim am karet v'al shigigatam. So, as we mentioned a few minutes ago, if you do any of these isurim b'mezid, you're chayav karet. If you did them b'shogeg, you're chayav b'chatat. They all have this in common. V'al lo hodash shelahen asham talui. If you did them in a way you don't know for sure if you did them, then you're supposed to bring an asham talui. חוץ מן המטמא מקדש וקדשה ומפני שהוא בעולה ויורד, דברי רבי מאיר. So I'm not going to go into this machloket here, but the idea of the lalo, we'll see here the part gon shnei zeitim. What does it mean lo hoda? So let's say you had two olives. Echad shel chelev, zeitim, not literal olives, in other words, the size of an olive. Echad shel chelev, echad shel shuman. So you had in front of you these two little pieces of fat from an animal, and even if you assume that the animal was slaughtered kosher, which is the assumption here, as we've mentioned many times, chelev is not something the Torah allows you to eat. Chelev is only to be brought on the mizbeach, but shuman you're allowed to eat. But once you remove them from the animal, they're very hard to distinguish. And let's say you had a plate of chelev, and you ate the contents of one of the plates. You don't know which one you ate. Or this is a little bit more bizarre. You have his wife and his sister were with him in bed. He had intercourse with one of them, and he doesn't know which he had intercourse with. which is a little bizarre, but it's a possible case. But in other words, the point is that you did something which might have been completely mutar, or it was an isur karet, and you don't know which one you did. So you bring an asham talui. The fish shabal has safek karuya asham talui. Since the reason asham talui is because it comes because of the depth of whether you had to bring it or not. Shetoleh umagen alav mina yisurim. It suspends and it protects you from yisurim, right? From hardships that the Kadosh Baruch Hu might bring upon you for having violated that isur. Ve'ino mechaper, but it doesn't give you a kapara. It's there to sort of protect you while you're in this state of limbo. You're kind of in a suspended state. Shim nodai la b'achar kach b'veirua shechanta mevi chatat kvua. Because if afterwards you find out for sure that you did do a chait, then you have to bring a chatat kvua. You have to bring in other words, you have to bring a regular korban chatat. And then there are exceptions, and maybe exceptions, and so forth. But these are all basic concepts having to do with these isurim. So b'mezid, if it's one of the 36 things for which the Torah is mechayev karet, if you do it b'mezid, you're chayav karet. If you did it b'shogeg, you're chayav chatat. And if you did something which may have been one of these things, but you don't know, then you bring an asham talui until the point where you would find out for sure. And then you bring a chatat kavua, right? So we saw at the end the Rambam, the Aruch HaShulchan at the end we just read. So he says, if you chayav an asham talui, but you go through Yom Kippur, so Yom Kippur takes away, it's poter you from the asham talui. In other words, it's also there to be magen. As I said, we'll leave that particular question though for later. Okay. So then it goes through various examples. Second. Okay. Most of the rest of the chapter deals with women who have to bring a korban after they give birth, and various sfeikot that might be attached to that. In Perek Sheni, we introduced the idea of mechusrei kippurim, that there are 4 people who are mechusrim. Va'arba mevi'in al azadon shkaga. There are 4 people who are considered to be mechusrei kapara, and there are also 4 people who bring a korban bizadon if they did something b'mezid, the same as if they did it bishkaga. Now, this is not immediately relevant to our discussion, but I want to just introduce this or go through some of these concepts. So the idea of we've talked about the mechusrei kapara was actually, this has to do with the very first sugya in Brachot, if you remember, right? Because the Mishnah says, and in one of the chidushim is that once they were tovel, then that night they can already eat, even if they still have a korban, because it could be that they have a tumah for which they're chayav a korban after they have tahara. So all the time that a person is has a kind of tumah for need to bring a korban at the end of, then until they bring the korban, they are mechusrei kapara, and they're not allowed to eat kodashim. That's the it's the nafkamina, right? You can't eat kachim per se. Say Elohim l'chusei kippurim hazah v'hazava v'hayoledet v'hamitzora. Right, so we have these four categories of people. The zav is right a person who sees ziva. It's a man, right? A zav is a man who sees a that's not shichvat zera. It's not semen. There's another kind of emission that comes from the. And if he sees 3 times in a row, even if it's on the same day, then he has to wait 7. He has to bring a korban. The zava is a woman who sees blood when it's not blood of her period, right? So she finished her the month, and then she saw blood, and if she sees blood 3 days in a row, it's a little different than the zav. If she sees blood 3 days in a row, then she's considered to be a zavadola. She has to count 7 clean days, and then she'll bring a korban. The yoledet, right? We just right in the parsha recently in Tazria. This is the beginning of the parsha. The woman who gives birth, whether it's a zachar, whether it's a nekeva. So for zachar, she's tmeya for a week, and then she's clean for 33 days, and then she brings a korban. If she gives birth to a girl, she's tmeya for 2 weeks, then she's clean for 66 weeks, and then she brings 66 days, and then she brings a korban and a mitzorah. At the time that the mitzorah has been declared to no longer be a mitzorah, that he is tahor, then he also brings a korban. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he adds in the case of the ger, someone who converts mechusar kaparat yizarek alav hadam. He's also mechusar kapara until blood is sprinkled for him. In other words, he would bring a korsa, and a nazir v'tiglachto. So nazir also, when he finishes his nazirut, he also has to bring a korban, and so it's as if he, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he's like a mechusar kapara until he brings his korban. Okay. And then we have the case of Elam Avin al Zadon Kishkaga. I don't want to go into these in any detail, but just Habal Hashivcha. And as you see, the Bartanur's Girsas Haba Al Hashivcha Charufa, right? So the Torah says, if you have bia, right? If you have sexual relations with a shivcha charufa, and what exactly is a shivcha charufa? Discussion, but let's say shivcha charufa, according to opinions, is the woman who is half a shivcha, or she's half a slave and half a free person, right? But she's not entirely free. So if somebody has bia with her, then whether it's b'meizid or whether it's b'shogeg, he has to bring a korban. So in other words, the chiddush of these cases, these 4 cases, is these are cases where the Torah says, normally the Torah says that if you do an isur b'meizid, you don't get to bring a korban. It's not an option for you. Right? You'll be chayav karet, you'll be chayav makot, but you don't bring a korban. So these are 4 exceptions. In these cases, even when you do it b'meizid, you also bring a korban. Habal shivcha b'nazir shenitma al shvuat ha'edut al shvuat ha'pikadon. Then we have a case. Chamisha mevi'in korban echad al averot. ו50 מביאים קורבן עולה ויורד. So there are five people that bring one korban for many aveirot. And there are five people who bring korban olevi yored. And so korban olevi yored, we know, is what?
It has different values depending upon the wealth of the person. Am I confused?
Yes, right. The Torah lays out that in certain cases when you need to bring a korban, the Torah gives you an option either to bring a keves if you're wealthy, and if you don't have enough money for the keves, you can bring a fowl. You can bring klorim of neonah, or if you don't have enough money for fowl, then you can bring a korban mincha, right? A meal offering. So. Abala shivcha biyot harbe v'nazir shimatu mot harbe. So somebody who had bia with the shivcha many times. So he brings one korban, even though each bia is an aveira unto itself, but he only brings one korban for all the biot. And the nazir, who's not allowed to become tamei, but if he becomes tamei many times, he also just brings one korban. Etc. So again, these are all things that are worthy and to go into, but you'll see in a moment why I'm bringing up, even though they don't all immediately fit into our concern, but what we're starting to see is the Mishnah is already introducing to us this idea of when will you be chayav korban, and what happens if you do the same aveira more than once? How many korbanot would you bring? How do we distinguish? These are all concepts that we're starting to bring up here. And here, the Isha Shialda V'ladot Arbe, right? What if a woman gave birth more than once within a relatively short amount of time, which can happen when she miscarries? Let's say a woman gave birth normally, and then while she was, let's say she gave birth to a girl, and then she has these 80 days, right? She has 2 weeks when she's Tameah, 66 days that she's Tahora, like all of her dam is Tahor. What if so during the time that her dam is Tahor, she's allowed to have sexual relations again with her husband? What if she got pregnant? And then what if she miscarried? Before she got to the end of the 80 days, when she was supposed to bring the korban on her original birth, right? So this is another, right? So this is another. These are, and here this is the question of the shifa. Ezohi shifa kol shechatzia shifa v'chatzia ben chorin shneim v'hafta lo niftata divrei Rabbi Akiva. Yishma omer zo ki shifa badait. Rabbi Yozar ben Azariah omer kol ha'arayot mefurashot ma shiur ein lanu el shechatzia shifa v'chatzia ben bat chorin. The idea of somebody being half a slave and half a free person, here the Parturun says, Chetze Shifcha v'chorin, amoresed le'eved ivri, shuhu mutar b'shivcha, u'mutar b'vat chorin. So let's say she was engaged to an eved ivri. So an eved ivri, actually, he's a Jew. He's chayav in all of the mitzvot, but there's an exception for him in terms of having, he's allowed to marry a shivcha. Whereas if he wouldn't be an eved, he would not be allowed to marry a shivcha. So if she's mureset to the Eved Ivri, she's kind of quasi-status. The shivcha that we're talking about here was a non-Jewish woman who became a shivcha of a Jew. And this is the idea, this is also like the Evet Kanani. There's a kind of a quasi-Jewish status get because they have to take on certain mitzvot when they become, uh, but they're not b'nei chorin l'chol davar. Anyway, you know what? I shouldn't go into this, but mutar b'shivcha mutar b'vat chorin. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to do this because I think it's going to end up being too confusing. Just we'll take it on. We'll take it just as a category. Okay, now we come to Perek Shlishi. We want to look mainly at second Mishnah, but let's look at the first Mishnah first. Amru lo achalta chelev mevi chatat. So somebody tells you that you ate chelev. You apparently didn't know that you ate chelev, or you don't say anything. So that's what the Barturu says. Afil echad omer achalta chelev, v'hu shotek ve'eno makrisha, mevi chatat al piv. So the testimony of a single witness who says, I know that you ate chelev, if you don't refute that, if you don't deny it or try to refute it, then that's an acquiescence, and you'll bring a korban for having presumably this chelev. Eid omer achal ve'eid omer lo achal. What if you have one, he ate chelev, another witness said he didn't eat chelev? Presumably they're talking about the same instance. And it could also be one of these work. There was a plate in front of him, and one person said, I know that was chalev, and he ate it. The other person says, I know that was shuman, and that's what he ate. In other words, even a woman, and I don't, not to be insulting, but in halacha, right? So for certain types of testimony, women are not they're not valid witnesses, but women are believed being yanei isurim, right? In isur, they're believed. So if one woman says that he chalev and another woman says he didn't eat chalev, so in other words, whether the witness is a male witness, whether they're male witnesses or female witnesses, if you have one that says yes and one that says no, maybe asham talui, right? And then presumably you, the person that they're talking about, you didn't say anything. So then you bring an asham talui, right, which fits into this idea of asham talui, that now we don't know. So we started off with the idea of the asham talui is that you ate from a plate and one plate was shuman and one was chalev and you didn't know which one you ate. So that's one way you bring an asham talui. Here's another way that you'll be chayav an asham talui is if two people say that they saw you eating, and one says you ate something asur, and one says you ate something mutar. So they also have to bring an asham talui. Ein omer achal, v'hu omer lo achalti. Witnesses says you ate whatever, you ate chel, and then you deny it. You say, no, I didn't eat it. Then you're patur. Shnaim omrim achal, v'hu omer lo achalti. What if two witnesses say, we saw you eat chelev, and you say, no, I didn't? Rabbi Meir mechayev. So Rabbi Meir says, you have to bring, on that you bring a chatat. And presumably, the Rabbanan disagree with Rabbi Meir and say that you don't bring a chatat. So there's a little discussion. Amar Rabbi Meir, So now, Amar Rabbi Meir, im haviyu shnayim l'mita chamura lo yiviyuhu l'korban akal. See, he makes a kal v'chomer. He says, if you had two witnesses who saw this person and also warning that before he did it, an isur d'ita, for which he would be chayav ita, and they testified, even if he denied it, he would still be chayav mita. So if you say that two witnesses can bring capital punishment, then all the more so wouldn't you say that they should be able to make him chayav a korban, which is certainly a much lesser punishment. Amrulo, but the Rabban say to him, Ma'im yirtzeh lomar mezid hayiti. What if he wanted to say, I did it on purpose? In other words, I ate the chaylev, yeah, I ate it, but I ate it on purpose. So what's the difference? If he said he ate it on purpose, so what?
He doesn't
What's
have
the
to.
difference? I'm sorry, say it again.
If he did it on purpose, he doesn't have to bring a korban.
If he brings it, right. In other words, if he ate it on purpose, then he's not chayav a korban. So they're saying to Rabbi Meir, it's not the same. It's not the same, because in the case we have two witnesses that are, give testimony about something for which he's chayav capital punishment. Ein ma lasot. There's nothing that he can claim that's going to get him out of. But in the case where he's going to be chayav a korban, all he has to say is, yeah, I ate it on purpose. And once he says, I ate it on purpose, then he's patur for being a chatan. Okay. Now, Michael Werner, I fear I'm losing you. I didn't hear what you said.
It's getting through.
Okay. Okay. Achal chaylev, b'chaylev, b'helem echad, eno chayav ela chatat echad. Okay, so now, what you ate chaylev, and then you ate some more chaylev, right? You ate kazayas of chaylev, and then a little bit you ate another kazayas of chaylev, and b'helem echad, right? So you did it in some kind of an unconscious state. This seems to fit into everything we know about this kind of thing, that when you repeated the same isur over a period of time, but it was with one helem, it was in one unconscious state, then even though you ate more than one, let's say in this case, let's say you ate many kazait. Let's say you ate a kazayas in the morning, you ate a kazayas in the evening, you had more the next day, whatever it was. But all the time you didn't realize it was chaylev. All the time you thought eating chaylev is okay. And then find out that it's not. You bring one korban chatat. Achal chaylev v'dam v'notar ufigul behelem. Chayav al kol echad v'echad. So if you ate different isurim behelem echad, then you have to bring a korban for each of them. So what does it mean behelem echad? Presumably it means in some kind of unconscious state, and unconscious meaning you weren't conscious of the fact that eating chelev, dam, and notar and pigul are things that are asur. Or that the things that you were eating, you didn't realize that they were chelev, dam, notar, and pigul. So there, you're chayav for each and every one. So this is a basic concept of this idea that that isurim are mitchalkin, right? They divide up into different categories. In each one of these is a category unto itself. So if you're over on different isurim, even though, in other words, all of these are achira, you're always eating, right? But each one of them is a separate isur. So even if you ate them behelem echad, you're chayav for each and every one. Ze chomer b'minim harbe mimin echad, v'chomer b'min echad mimin harbe. So there's a chumrah regarding many minin, many types of isurim. That's more chamor than one type of thing that's asur. And there's also a chumrah by one type of thing that's more chamor than many types of things. She'im achal kechatzi zayit v'chazar v'achal kechatzi zayit mimin echad chayav. Mishnei minim patur. Right. So the thing that's chamor about minim harbe is what we just said. If you ate many minim harbe that are asur behelem echad, you're chayav b'chatat on each one. What's the chumrah of min echad? That if you ate a chatzi zayit of something that was asur, and then you ate chatzi zayit of that same thing that's asur, then you have to bring a korban chatat. But if you ate a chatzi zayit of pigul and a chatzi zayit of notar, you don't bring a chatat at all.
Could a parallel be drawn here between how we do between how we do Tamot and Maserot? Say if we have different categories of produce, we Maser each one separately. Is this related?
Only in a very, very broad sense, but it's not really the same. In other words,
I guess the categories are defined differently. We break down the categories differently.
It's not just that the categories are it's in the broadest sense that yes, because we have this idea in halakha that there are categories of things that are relevant to different areas of halakha. So let's say in Trumot and Masrot, we have different, we have different categories of food because foodstuffs are considered to be different, right? So if you have apples and you have oranges, you have to take Trumot and Masrot from them separately. But if you had different, different, what's the word I'm looking for? Different minim of apples.
Different varieties of apples.
Thank you. Different varieties of apples, then presumably that, you could take Trumot and Masrot on all of them together. So in a sort of very broad sense, yes, they're divided up into categories for halachic purposes. So yes, in some way it's related. But here we're talking about categories of things that are asur, and it's important to know what the different categories are for these purposes. Now, I say it's important to know. So, in other words, a lot of the discussion here is not. You can argue correctly, that you could say it doesn't have a practical difference, bisman hazeh, because we don't bring korbanot. And if you're doing these things b'meizid, so like you said, like if you're doing a lot of isurei karet all at once, or one after the other, whatever, you'll be chayav karet, but how many times can you be karet? But there, I would say the difference would be: what if you do tshuva for one and not for the other? You did two isurei karet, and you did tshuva for one, and you didn't do for the other. So then, presumably, you'll still be chayav karet. We can think about other conceptual issues, but for the moment, I just want to come back to this, get through some of these other basic halachot. But what we're doing is we're sort of building up a base of like a knowledge base that is going to come to be relevant in ways that have to do with the halacha we started off with. So here's where I think I looked at this mission once before, but how much time would the person who's eating these things that are asur be able to wait between eating the two chetzi zeitim and still be considered as one shiur? Kami yishal haochlan ki'ilu achavan klayot. Divri Rebbe Meir. We look at them as if he was eating klayot. So klayot were, parched grains that people used to eat. It was a kind of a snack. And so what does it mean? Let's say you had a kazayit of, some parched barley, right? You could take some barley and parch it, and then you eat it like a little snack. But they're little bits. You'd have to eat a lot of them to get a whole kazayit. So Rabbi Meir says the time it would be the time it would take to eat a kazayit of klayot. The Bartanur says, "Roino tankilo nit pardala ferurim dakin ki klayot." We look at whatever it is that you're eating as if it was cut up into tiny little pieces, and you eat them one by one after the other, and that's what we measure by. So if you ate a chatzizayit of chelev, let's say, and then you waited a time and you wait another chatzizayit, so im shaham mitchila b'ad sof kedei achilat klayot b'samuch zu lazu mitzdarfi. If you waited, just under that time, from the beginning of the time that you started to eat the chetzizayit chelev until you finished the second chetzizayit, if that wasn't enough time to eat a kazayit of that, if it had been divided, like as if you're reading it as chayot, then it's mitzdaref. But if you never stopped eating, in other words, if you were picking at something, let's say you had a piece of cake or a cookie, and it was maybe the cookie was just a kazayit, but if you ate it one little bit at a time, you crushed it up into little teeny bits, and you ate it. Maybe it took you 2 hours to eat the whole thing, and you're only eating a teeny little bit at a time. Rabbi Meir says that would still be mitzdaref, because that you could eat chayot like that as long as you continually ate. If it added up to a kazayit, because that's the way people would eat chayot. Anyway, we don't hold like Rabbi Meir, but it's an interesting concept. We hold like the Chachamim. Chachamim omrim, ad sheyishem yitchila b'yad sof kedei achilat pras. So this is the makor for this din of waiting, of this shiur's man of eating is kedei achilat pras. Achar ochlin tamein v'shata mashkin tamein shata revi'it yain v'nichnas l'mikdash v'shaha kedei achilat pras Rabbi Eliezer nifsik ba o shnatan oto chomayim kol shu patur. Okay, so those are specific examples. We won't need to get into them. But now, all of this, this very truncated version of the beginning of Kritot, it was to come up to this Mishnah here. So here we're in Kritot, Perek Gimel Mishnah Dalet. Yesh ochel achila achat, v'chayav alea arba chataot v'asham echad. There's a case where one person could eat one thing and have to bring 4 korbanot chatat and a korban hasham. Just eating one. So what would that be? Tamei shachal et achelev v'haya notar. Min mukdash uve Yoma kippurim. So let's break this down. What did this guy do? He ate one thing. He ate chaylev that was notar, that was mash on Yom Kippur. So we see, without, I want to go through the Bartanura with you on this, because the Bartanura here is going to explain the mechanics of how he comes to be that he's chayav for chataot and a nasha. But the idea is this is where this is a case where by doing one act, even though in general we say ein isur halal isur, but sometimes that's not true. So how does he come to bring arba chatot? So chan mishum chelev, chan mishum ochel kodesh betuma, v'chan mishum notar, v'chan mishum yom kippurim. Okay, so the chelev that he was eating was from something that was kodesh, like from a korban, something that was kodesh, and it was also notar. So that's 3 right away, and it's on Yom Kippur. So that's 4. That's 4 chatalot, because each one of those is a separate shame. It's a separate category. Eating chaylev is asur. Eating kodesh betuma asur. Eating notar is asur, and Yom Kippur is asur.
So just to make sure, I'm not sure if I remember the term notar. Notar is something that's registered, like
Notar is a korban. Michael Schwartz, do you want to say what notar is?
It's a korban that's not eaten within its prescribed time.
Very good. Right. So it was over. It's left over. It went past the time that you were allowed to eat it. So now the Bartanu is going to explain this. So even though we learn in the entire Torah that you can't have an isur top of another isur. Hane mile be isur greda. Kigon hanevelat behemat temeya. Eno chayav mishum nevela. Lefishu isur greda she'eno lo kolel v'lo mosif. So this is all regarding an isur greda. Greda means like alone. It means an isur greda means it's simply an isur without anything that it can that can extend it. So if you ate the nevela of a behemat tameya, so what's the problem? You're never allowed to eat a behemat tameya, even if you shechted it. And you're never allowed to eat a behemat tahora if you didn't shecht it. If you didn't shecht it, if you have a behemat tahora and wasn't shechted or wasn't shechted properly, that's the halachic definition of a nevela. Right? It could have died by itself. It could have been improperly shechted. However it died, it didn't die by way of shlitak shera. So you have there are 2 isurim here. There's the isur of eating a neva, which applies to behemat tahora. And you also have an isur of not eating a behemat tameya under any circumstances. So what if you ate a nevela of a behemat tameya? What if you ate a behemat tameya that died shelo al yedei shlita? You're only chayav, eno chayav mishum nevela. Lefishu isur greda she'eno lo kolel v'lo mosif. The isur of the nevela doesn't glom onto it. It doesn't attach to it because it's just an isur by itself. It doesn't include anything, and it doesn't. You can't include any. It doesn't include other possible isurim with it, and you can't, and it doesn't add on any other possible isurim, which, and in a moment he's now going to explain, but that's not true of all isurim. So he gave you an example though of an isur greda, which means that the isur greda of nevela doesn't attach itself to the isur of behemat tameya. In a sense, it's not relevant. The fact that it's a nevela is irrelevant because the behemat tameya is asur under any circumstances. So the fact that you ate a nevela that's a behemat tameya, it doesn't change the fact that you ate a behemat tameya in any way. It doesn't make it more chamur, as it were, right? There was one isur. To put it a little bit differently, or maybe I just said this a moment ago, if you shechted a behemat tameya, you took a pig and you gave it a kosher shchita, you didn't accomplish anything to make it mutar. The fact that you shechted it halachically doesn't change its status as a behemat tameya. So there's no halachic difference between eating a behemat tameya that's shechted or that's a nevela. There's no halachic difference. So the isur of nevela doesn't how it can't attach itself on to the isur of behemat tameya.
So as we say back in the older country, if you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
That's right. Avahacha. What about the case that we're talking about here in the Mishnah? Adam shaya mitchilat tahor. So let's start off with a person who's tahor. Haya asur b'elev. He's always going to be forbidden from eating chelev. Mutar b'shar basar shel kodshim, but he would be allowed to eat other meat from kodshim, right? In other words, if it was a korban that he was allowed to eat, let's say a korban shlamim, let's say Pesach, beseder. So he's tahor, he's allowed to eat kodshim, but he's never allowed to eat chelev. Naseh tameh. Now, what happens to him when he becomes tameh? Now he's tameh. Migo dinesa b'shar chatichot shel b'sar kodeshim mishum tuma. In that, he's now asur to eat the other pieces of meat from this kodeshim because he's tameh. Itzar nami b'chelev. He's also. So it's now asur for him to eat the chelev in addition to the fact that it was asur for him to eat the chelev to begin with, because no one's ever allowed to eat chelev. But when he was tahor and he ate chelev, so that was one isur. But what if he ate chelev that was from kodshim when he was tameh? So the chelev was part of the kodshim as whole. It was part of that animal. It was part of that korban. So the tuma that he had, the tuma that he has, makes it forbidden for him to eat any part of this korban, including the chelev, on top of the isur chelev that already existed. Itzar nami b'chelev, afal pi shaita asura mitchila, even though he was already asur, behind an isur kolel, because this is an isur kolel. It's an isur that comes to include shaha isur acharon, the latter isur, which in this case is the isur of a tamei eating kodshim. Kolel v'oser dvarim acherim al hadam shayu mutarim lo mitchila. It comes to include and make forbidden other things to this person that to begin with had been permitted to him. So that's an Isur Kolel. That is, once he became Tameh, the whole Korban became Isur for him to eat. And at that moment, we don't separate out the Chelev from the rest of the animal because all of it was part of the same Korban. So the Isur Tuma is an Isur Kolel. And it comes to include even the Chelev that was already a Isur for him. So now we have, so if the person who was Tameh ate Chelev from Kodshim, he's Chayav two Chataot. He's Chayav for the Chelev, and he's also Chayav for the Chelev because it's Kodshim, and he's Tameh. Umihu, nonetheless, lo itosaf isra achefza, ela agavra itosaf isura, legabe achrine, v'garer v'chayel nami lahai b'isure. So now, this is a very fine point. He's saying the Isur that has this Isur, the second Isur of the Chelev, is not an Isur because of the Chelev. It's an Isur because of the person. Mihu lo itosaf Isura achefza. Chefza is these terms, which you may have heard before. These are very important terms. When we talk about Isurim or also mitzvot, we want to know is the Isur or the mitzvah, is it a mitzvah on the person to do this thing, do this act, or is there something about the thing itself that makes it something that the person is obliged to do? So, for example, you have to put a mezuzah on your house. What if you don't live in a house? So then you don't have a mitzvah. The mitzvah is for you, it's a chiyuv on you, on the gavra, on the person. It's a mitzvah of the gavra. It's not, in other words, let's say you own a house and you don't live in the house. So then you might say the mitzvah is, if the mitzvah is on the gavra, then you don't have to put up a mezuzah on the house that you own. It's only if you live there that you have to put it up. Here, where we're talking about the Yisur of Chelev, that it's forbidden for you as a person to eat Chelev, and it's forbidden for you as a person to eat Kodshim Betuma. So the Chelev, the status of the Chelev didn't change when you became Tameh, but your relationship to it changed. Agavra Yitosaf Isura, the Isur was added onto the person, the Gabe Achrine, regarding other things. The Garer, and it pulled along the Chayel, and it included Nami, Lahai, it included also the Chelev, the Isure, is Isur. In his status as somebody who's Tameh, who's now Asur to eat Kodshim. Now, what's the next step? Nasa zeh hachelev notar. What happens if the chelev that he's eating became notar, right? So let's say it was a korban pesach, and he come and the korban pesach now is notar. It's the next day after when it was supposed to be eaten. So now you're not allowed to eat any part of this korban. In other words, whether you're tameh or whether you're tahor, you're not allowed to eat anything from this korban. Hainu isur mosif. So this is what we call an isur mosif, an isur that adds on. Demikara lehediot asur ulegavo share. Kivan shasa notar nosaf isur al chatatzma leyaser afilu lagavoa. That from the beginning, the hediot asur. Hediot means a common person. In this context, it means a Jew who's not God. So that, in other words, in this instance, every Jew is a hediot, right? Because we've seen that we've talked about this term hediot, right? We also have the idea of the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen hediot. But here, hediot means any Jew, right? So in the Mikara, from the beginning, for any Jew, the chaylev was always asur, as we've said several times. Ulegavoa share. Gavoa, for high up, in other words, for the Kadosh Baruch Hu, it was mutar, meaning what? Because you take the chaylev and you burn it on the mizbeach. It's part of an offering that you give to God. So God, as it were, Gavoa, can consume the chaylev. But we as people, we are stam yidden, we don't get to consume chaylev. Kevan shenasantar, once it becomes notar, nosaf isura chaticha atzma leyaser afilu legavoa. Now that piece of chaylev is asur even as it were for God. You're not allowed to put it on the mizbeach to be burnt. It's not that you're not just, in other words, the basar that you were allowed to eat from the Korban Pesach, you were allowed to eat it kolzman that it wasn't notar. Now that it's notar, you're not allowed to eat it. The same thing for the parts of the animal that you were supposed to burn on the mizbeach. Once the time passes that you were allowed to eat it, everything becomes notar. You're no longer allowed to burn it on the mizbeach. ומתוך שחל עליה שם איסור נותר לאסרם לגבוה, so now that it has become an isur notar, which means it's all forbidden legavoa, chal alea nami shem notar gabe hadiot liitchayev alea mishum notar. It now also has the status of notar for the hediot. And now it's notar also for the hediot, also for the regular yid. Afal gav the beloved hachi hayta asura the hediot. Even before it was notar, it was also asur for the hediot. So this is an isur mosif. We're adding on to it. We're going to add on to it this layer that the isur that was associated with chaylev before it was notar, add on to it another isur once it becomes notar, and now it's two isurim for the hediot, and that's because of the cheftza, right? The status of the chaylev has changed. In the case when he was tamei, he was tahor and then he was tamei, his status changed, even though the chaylev didn't change. Here, the chaylev changed because first it was mutar legaboa, and now it's notar, it's asur legaboa. So the cheftza changed. Migo di tosaf isur legabe gavra. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped something. Avogab the lav hayta asura lehedya. Chal aleh Yoma Kippurim. So now we come to our case of Yom Kippur. What if he ate this on Yom Kippur? Migo di itosaf isur legabe gavra. Michael, why is Yom Kippur relevant here? Follow up. I'm going to say it. Migo di tosaf isur gabe gabra astro b'chulin. I'm sorry, 1 second. Someone's going by. Sorry. Chal Yoma Kippurim. So now, what have we concluded so far? We're always talking about a piece of chaylev. We're talking about some Jew who's eating chaylev. So to begin with, he was never allowed to eat chaylev because the Torah says you're not allowed to eat chaylev. Stop. From any animal, from a kosher animal, you're not allowed to eat. Then we said, what was the next step?
So the next step is that it's the Jew now is now tameh. Is now in tuma.
Okay.
And so therefore his relationship to this hell has changed. So there's an added prohibition that hinges on the status of the gavra as well as the original, as well as the hefsa. The original prohibition hinges on the hefsa, and the second one hinges on the gavra.
Okay, and then what was the next stage?
Notar, which changes the status of the hefsa. So there's an additional prohibition that adheres to the hefsa.
Okay, and now we come to Yom Kippur. So now on Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur. So now the Yom Kippur now falls out on this chaylev. Ego di itosaf isura legabe gavra lasro bechulin shayu mutim lo kodem Yom Kippurim. Since I now have the isur of Yom Kippur, which now forbids to him all manner of food that had been permitted to him before Yom Kippur, gorer v'cholel nami lahai chelev shamukdashim b'had. It's now going to pull along and include this chelev of hekdesh, of kodshim, b'hadei, with it. Litchayev ala mishum Yom Kippurim. So here, the status of the day of Yom Kippur is now going to change the status of this person vis-a-vis the chelev, because before Yom Kippur he could eat any food that was mutar, but now that it's Yom Kippur, he's not allowed to eat at all. So the at all means he can't eat anything, even things that are asur to eat. In the same way that chelev got pulled into the kodshim, he was never allowed to eat chelev, right? But once he became tamei and he ate chelev, I say because the chelev was part of kodshim, so in his status change, now he's tamei, it pulled along with it the chelev. And so when he ate the chelev as a person who's tamei, then it's a second isur. And then when it turned out that the chelev was notar, the status of the chelev had changed, and it had an additional isur on it. The additional isur was now it was asur legavoa, and so its status also then changed vis-a-vis the person who eats it. And now lastly we say, because it's Yom Kippurim, that the status of Yom Kippurim tells me that he's not allowed to eat anything, including things that were already asur to him, even if that thing was already asur 3 times. This is now going to be another reason that it's asur. So yesh ochel achila achat v'chayav aleh arba chatat. So you could have a person eat one piece of chaylev, and if the chaylev was kodshim and he was tamei and it was notar and it was Yom Kippur, he has to bring 4 korbanot chatat. What's the asham? Asham, all right, and he also has to bring 1 asham. Asham echad. Asham mi'ilot al shenenem min hekdesh b'shogeg. Right? So there's a general halacha that the Torah says you're not allowed to benefit from kadshim. So if you benefit from kadshim b'shogeg, you have to bring an asham ilot. So this person eating is certainly a benefit, right? That's the most basic benefit is eating. So the fact that he ate the chaylev from kadshim, he has to bring a korban asham. This is also considered to be isur mosif. Ditosaf isura al cheftza. The isur here was added on to the cheftza, to the chaylev. In what sense? The kodim dehikdisha haya chaylev ze asur b'achila mutar b'hanaa. Because before this, the animal from which this chaylev came was dedicated to the Beit HaMikdash, so the chaylev was asur for eating, but it was permitted b'hanaa. What does it mean to be asur for eating but permitted b'hanaa? What's the case? What kind of hanaa could you get from it?
Could he either sell it to a non-Jew or burn it for heat?
Two perfectly good examples, right? So the chaylev, so let's say it wasn't a korban, right? So an animal that wasn't a korban, he took his cow, he slaughtered it, he separated out the chaylev. He's not allowed to eat the chaylev. If he wanted, he could turn it into fuel, or he could go to a non-Jew. Both of those things are perfectly acceptable. He gets benefit from both of them without eating it. But once it was mukdash, now it belongs to Gavoa, right? Now it belongs to the Beit HaMikdash. Now you're not. Now he's not allowed to get any benefit from this chaylev. Mitoch shechal shem ekdesh al chaylev la'asro b'hanaa. Since the name of hekdesh has now been attached to this chaylev to make it forbidden in hana, chalalav nami litchaye b'achilato mishum neneh mina hekdesh. So since it got this extra layer of isur, right? Before it was only asur ba'achila. Now it's asur ba'achila uva. So that attaches on to it. So now he eats it. He's also going to be chayav for having binene mina hekdesh. Okay, I think this is a good place to stop. I hope I explained this well. It's a lot of stuff, but as I was looking through, and by the way, the terminology here of Isur Koleo and Isur Mosif and all of that. So this comes up in the Gemara. There are a lot of different opinions about how this works. And I chose to do this Bartanura because I found this to be a very nice encapsulation of examples. Even if not all opinions agree with every aspect of what's being said here, but it gives you the basic approach that brings these concepts together. Just in the last minute, because I also have to go. If we go back now and look at the Aruch HaShulchan, I think hopefully what he said makes it makes more sense. In other words, now we understand the terminology to a greater degree. And he says, Ve'en chiluk b'yom kippurim, ben shachal davar isur, ben shachal davar heter, im ha'machui la'achila chayav karet, im patur. Ve'en omar deba'ochel isur kippurim, ein isur yom kippurim chal aha isur ha'acher. Right, so this was where we began, and this was really Michael Werner's question from last time. Now we understand. He said the Isur of you don't say Isur of Yom Kippur doesn't fall out on or come on top of the other Isur of eating. In other words, right, that if you eat something that you're not allowed to eat on Yom, you're not allowed to eat any day if you eat it on Yom Kippur. אלא אפילו הוא איסור חמור, ולא מבאי עם אותו איסור, איסור לאו, דחל עליו איסור חמור, ולא מבאי עם אותו האיסור הוא איסור לאו, דחל עליו איסור חמור דיום הכיפורים. You don't say, it doesn't make any difference if it's that the isur of what you're eating is an isur lav, and in the isur of Yom Kippur is an isur chamor that's falling out of. But we say afilu hu isur chamor k'machela v'dam. Mikom makom harei Yom Kippurim havi isur kolel, shekolel gam kol hama'achalim. It includes all manner of food. Isur kolel chal, and isur kolel does take hold. I'm going to use that translation. It's chal, it takes hold. It becomes pertinent. This is one of the cases where we don't say ein isur al isur. Rather, the isur of Yom Kippurim can come on top of the isur of Erev. Anyway, I encourage all of you, if you have time, go through this Bartanura again. And we looked a little bit, I read through quickly the Rambam from Perek Dalet and Shkagot. It may also be helpful to see the Rambam there. The concepts of Yisur Kolel and Yisur Mosif come in different places and in different times, but it seemed to me that particular Bartanura was a good place that brought many of those concepts together. So that's it, I think, for tonight. Anyway, any last questions or comments?
So how much longer are you here in town, or do you know yet?
I do. I'm leaving Sunday morning.
Asiya Tova.
Thank you. Okay. Tov. Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Golden and Medina.
Good Shabbos.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.